I have the landmass of the island of Jamaica. I'm the king of Stettler, Castor, and Bashaw.
What is our topic again?
Yeah. Canon Law. Canon Law.
Hello, welcome to Left Footers. I'm Father Mark Kramer. I'm back from a hiatus. I'm back here with Father Roger. We are so excited to have you back. We made fun of your absence and we're glad you're back, but you've been back for, several episodes now.
Just a couple.
We have a guest. We have a guest with us. Who are you?
I am John Vizza. I am a canon lawyer.
Oh, a canon lawyer. Is that where you shoot cannons at people, or is it that...
I did have a blog for a little bit that was called Canon Fire, so...
Oh, I thought cannon fodder might be a better one.
That could be good. Yeah, it depends.
That's
depends on
great.
the day of the week.
Yeah, fair enough, fair enough. So what is a canon lawyer?
Well, a canon lawyer, I guess, is somebody who deals with the law of the church. As the Roman Catholic Church, we have a body of law, which is called canon law. And so that's sort of the gist of it.
Cool.
Yeah.
So you know all stuff law then.
Well, I would say a little bit, for sure, yeah. We have two bodies of law, of course. The Roman Catholic Church has their own body of law, the 1983 Code of Canon Law. And then, of course, the Eastern Church, of which I am an Eastern Catholic, we have the 1990 Code of Canon Law. So two different laws, but for each church.
I have to say, why is the Code of Canon Law for the Eastern Church thicker than the one for the Roman
There are
Church?
more Eastern churches than Roman churches. It's only one Roman church.
So there's like law for every one of the churches, and it's only a sliver more?
I like the fact that you keep the Eastern on the Eastern side.
Yes,
and the Western
indeed.
on the
Indeed.
West.
That's right.
Yeah,
That's right.
sure.
Yes.
That's how you know which direction.
Propriety.
What do you do for North and South?
Well, there's no code yet, but who knows in the
Oh. It could be the Code of the North, like up here.
No,
Edmonton.
don't-
You can get the handbook of Archdiocese of Edmonton.
Don't invest in that space. That's the future.
That's the future. Okay,
Space canon law.
That's right.
Yep.
Space Canon Law. Oh, yes, very true. There's a whole expanse of dioceses to go into.
Well, I think there is a diocese in the United States that has jurisdiction over the moon.
It's quite possible.
From Rome?
Yeah. No, I think it's from Florida. I think we're actually having...
With the NASA Space Center.
Yes.
Oh.
Yep. We're having a guest next time around on Left Footers from that very diocese.
Oh, cool. Very awesome. We got to ask him about his the jurisdiction they have for the moon.
Indeed. So, I have a couple questions. And why do we have law in the first place? I mean, we assume, everyone knows about canon law, but why in the church do we need canon law? Aren't we just coming together on Sunday praying and just living our lives? Why overcomplicate things with, it looks like a couple thousand pages of things and laws and cases?
Especially in the world today where everybody lives their truth. It's important to have a body of laws which speak of the truth. And, in a very basic way, canon law keeps good order. That's sort of what we say as canon lawyers. As much as people turn their nose up at canon lawyers causing trouble in dioceses, really, the primary job of the canon lawyer is for the good of souls and to keep good order in the church. So it helps us really to subscribe to a common bond, a common law, and to minister according to that sort of law.
Okay. What is the basis of canon law? You mentioned common law. What is the heritage of canon law?
Well, I guess, primarily we can say canon law is scriptural because it's also theological, it's doctrinal, right? So in that sense, what we have, for example, in marriage law, we deal with something called the Pauline privilege, coming from the letters of St. Paul. But very much so, it's based on the doctrine and the teaching of our church, the magisterium, people, encyclicals and constitutions and things like that. So very much based on that, as well as, natural law principles as well.
So in canon law, are you guilty or innocent until proven?
What I'm saying is that man had rights.
Well, I'm all broken up about that man's rights.
It holds the same threshold, especially when we deal with penal law, that somebody is considered innocent until proven guilty. Again, another important reason we have law. In today's culture with these various movements that are going on, you seem to be proven guilty, and you have to try to prove your innocence. Of course, that's not the threshold of common law, of civil law, nor is it the threshold of canon law. You are innocent until proven guilty.
Okay, interesting.
I bet it would be really cool to do an entire series like whether it's book form or TV form, of why these different laws exist. Because I've seen rules come and exist into organizations because of people who've broken the rules. So it's always all the rules that exist because, oh gosh, someone broke the rules there. Because there's whole sections. They go, oh, okay.
That's right.
Obviously.
Although our canon law books are getting smaller, the 1917 Code of Canon Law, which was in effect until the 83 Code came, had about another 1,000 canons in it. So we are dwindling a little bit, trying to get more precise in defining things.
Something to do with the allowance of beards
Yeah,
on
that's
clergy
right. That's right.
back in the 1917, and no mention of that. So hence the
You're safe.
Barbarossa, the red beard.
So were you allowed to have a beard, or only could be so long?
It wasn't allowed for the Latin, the Roman Catholic Church, unless you had a special indult by the Holy See for a religious order. So I believe the Oblates actually had that possibility, and we do have pictures of the old Oblate fathers in Alberta with these mighty beards. Father Vegerville actually had this mighty beard.
What the heck is an indult, and why is he using language like that? Because he's using legal language. So tell us what an indult. I'm hoping it will pop up in front here, but what's an indult?
An indult is sort of a grant of permission. For example, in order to be a judge in a tribunal, one has to have a licentiate in canon law. In cases where dioceses might not have access to a priest or a lay person who has canonical studies, Rome can grant an indult or a permission for somebody to act in a capacity where they don't have the prerequisite sort of standards.
So I have to ask the question, because the nature of law is when the law becomes such that there's more exceptions to the rule than there is to the rule. Is that kind of one of the reasons why the law gets taken out, because people are asking for exceptions all the time? Because the nature we have the law, but then we have exceptions or indults and so forth.
It could very well be. I mean, that's sort of the thing about having law. Again, it keeps the good order of the church. And so in those cases where somebody is asking for let's say a dispensation, from some particular ecclesiastical law, that's there. And that, again, canon law is not meant to try to bind people in sort of a way which, doesn't allow them freedom. We are meant to use canon law to multiply the blessings in canon law. But again, it still has that undertone of keeping good order. So what you can do in one diocese, you can't do in another diocese, and so it keeps good order that way.
You know what? I think I agree with most of that, except for the one canon which I find incredibly sexist. The one that clearly allows a woman to abduct a man, and then that's not a problem for him to get, married with her. But if a man tries to abduct a woman, clearly that's a problem in the marriage process. Could you explain that, Grandin, a little bit?
Yeah, that sounds good. That's anti-misogamy.
One of the principles in canon law is we talk about the mind of the legislator. The legislator, of course, in canon law is the Holy Father. So I can't read into the mind of the legislator. I'm not sure exactly what he was thinking. Maybe perhaps he was thinking it was improbable that a woman would abduct a man. I don't know exactly. I don't know.
He's obviously never seen Misery with Kathy Bates.
So, I know.
So obviously, that's the problem when these things get made before good movies are made. We always get the wrong laws in place, or just different sorts of things, for sure.
Right.
Yeah.
And don't even think about anybody coming for you. Not the doctors, not your agent, not your family, because I never called them. Nobody knows you're here.
Now we got you're a canon lawyer, so you can ask you any question, you can answer it about the law.
You can try. I don't know if I'll have an answer. As professors of canon law usually say, be wary of the canon lawyer who has all the answers on demand.
Yeah, fair enough.
This is why we have the codes, to go back and
we
consult.
We don't really care. We want your answer.
I'll do my best. I'll do my best.
So we have this question that we were talking about. It was an interesting question, but I think it's worthy. Like you brought it up in your last discussion about Star Wars. Can you baptize baby Yoda? And then we got into this whole discussion before being on the screen. But the question, can you baptize, like if baby Yoda was real here on this planet, a sentient being? So differentiating from animals and that, I know we can make that argument that, you can't baptize something that's not a sentient being. But if it's a sentient being, could we baptize baby Yoda? And does the law have anything to say about that? Or is there something beyond the law we'd have to go to?
Okay, something beyond the law. That language usually scares canonists, because what is beyond the law, of course, but no. Well, of course, the code doesn't speak about baby Yoda per se, but certainly in terms of the subject of baptism, who is the person to be baptized, the code does speak about being a person. So those to be baptized, you have to be a person. And I don't think Baby Yoda falls into the human category.
Okay, but he's a person.
I don't know if, would you
We
consider
had this
him-
whole argument in law, by the way, when it came to women. Women were not considered persons in the law, at least in the American Constitution. I can't remember how it works within our North American Act. I imagine the same thing. But a person was strictly defined. So person can be defined. If we can get a woman there, can be baptized Baby Yoda.
I think, for these types of questions, especially ones that are beyond the law, I think there was a Jesuit at some point a couple of years ago
Why is it always
who talked about to the
Jesuits
Jesuits.
beyond the law?
God bless them. I believe that he wrote a book about baptizing extraterrestrials, and this is about a couple of years.
Yes, Brother Guy Consolmagno, the Vatican's astronomer.
That's right.
Yeah.
So I would refer you to that book for perhaps an answer to your question.
So maybe a better question with that, because I know we were just putting you on the spot. But a question, what if something doesn't come up in the law? What does that mean? Like where the law does not pertain to something?
Or hasn't really thought about the eventuality of this situation.
Yes.
There are many what we would call lacunas in the law, things which the law doesn't speak about or doesn't address. We have to remember that when Pope John Paul II promulgated the 1983 Code, he said to canonists and theologians, he referenced that very thing. There are going to be things in the law, and in the code that don't address every situation that comes up. Of course, one would hope a bishop in his given diocese would use prudence in those situations, but in a way, there are things that need to be added to the code, especially in our culture today of sexual abuse. We know that the Holy Father, Pope Francis, has come out with documents recently, changing the penal law of the church. The Canadian bishops, of course, in October 2018 came out with their document, Transformed in Love. So certainly there are these things which come up. So besides the Code of Canon Law and the canons therein, there are also the encyclicals, the apostolic constitutions, particular law in a given diocese. So there's an amalgamation of different things that one could have recourse to if the law doesn't specifically speak about it.
Father Mark, I think our encounter with the law, for the most part, is in the cases of marriages, when we have to come with the couple and to figure out, okay, well, are you free to marry? I know I have my own sort of number of questions about things to do with marriage canon law. So I'll begin with this one. Can you still get married if you have a prenup with someone?
Yeah, I mean, a prenup doesn't automatically invalidate the marriage. It would depend on the nature of the prenup. So I can give you an example. perhaps there's two people are married, a man and a woman. They have kids, and perhaps one of them dies. The father dies. And going into a second marriage, the woman could ask for a prenup from her second husband, as it were, and say that the money perhaps left in the estate of the first husband is due to the children of that first marriage. So perhaps they could have a prenup saying, any money that comes from his business or his wealth or whatever it might be is due to the children of the first marriage, not the children that might come in the second marriage. So that's an example of where a prenup could be very much valid and wouldn't vitiate consent of that second marriage. Yeah.
Interesting.
We would just have to be careful, for example, if the subject of the prenup was trying to set themselves up in the future for a divorce. So maybe the person is entering into a business. They have a very successful business, and they meet this person and they're going to get married. And they say, this is a really successful business. The person I'm marrying doesn't do much with their life, sort of a bit of a couch potato. I'm going to say that they have no claim to this inheritance of mine, just in case we get divorced. Of course, the mentality comes in there of divorce, and so that becomes a problem. So
That's not something you're necessarily, when you're interviewing people for marriage, that would be something you would be privy to. You would not know that. It would be more useful after the fact if, say, someone was married and then got divorced civilly and then they were seeking a decree of nullity.
It's possible. Canon 1063 talks about the pastor's due diligence in preparing a couple for marriage. And one of the questions that's sort of in that packet, so to speak, although you're right, it's not technically asking about a prenup, it sort of asks if there's any conditions on the marriage. And I guess you could sort of read into that, a prenup could be sort of conditional in a way. So it gives a lot of discretion to the pastors in the parishes.
Well,
so
Okay, first of all, I just have to say this. Okay, you quoting 1063 is sort of pretty cool that you have that number memorized, that this is the canon, because I could start making, up the numbers too, like canon 731 says...
Which is?
See, I don't know all the canons. There isn't even a seventh. No, I'm just kidding.
There has to be.
Of course.
He's messing
A
with it.
lacuna.
I'm messing with it. Yeah, no, but it's interesting for me personally, is when you do the interviewing process, you're trying to get to know the couple, and you're using the interview questions and all that. And stuff will come up, which is good. I don't go digging, though. I don't know if that's prudent that one go digging. I mean, you ask and you do that kind of stuff. You ask questions and people volunteer. If you notice something, you should write it, of course. But the thing is, though, it's not like you're trying to help these people. But
You're telling me I shouldn't be hiring investigators and going
no,
on...
he's the one that should
getting
tell
some
you to hire
donuts?
investigators, at least from the canon law perspective.
The pre-marriage file, the file that's filled out with the couple prior to marriage, lays out the basic questions to try to set the couple up for the best case scenario in their marriage. We want them not only to have a happy marriage, a healthy marriage, but especially for us canonists, a valid marriage. Okay? If there are things precluding an illicit marriage, we can sort of live with that. But an invalid marriage, it's very difficult. The invalid marriage means there's no marriage at all. As I like to say, to distinguish the terms validity and licetiety, if something is illicit but valid, it's okay. But if something is invalid, it never was. This is what we talked about in the tribunal process. A declaration of nullity means that the marriage was invalid.
What would be an example of something being illicit but not invalid?
Okay, so it doesn't quite work, I don't think, for our archdiocese, because all priests in this archdiocese have faculties to celebrate marriage in any parish in the archdiocese.
It's pretty nice. Yeah.
But for example, let's say you have a baptized Catholic marrying an Anglican party, and they don't request permission, to marry what we would call mixed religion, so a Catholic and an Anglican party. It's still a valid marriage, but it's illicit. Now, if you take the same case, a Catholic marrying somebody who's not baptized, if they don't grant a dispensation, then it's an invalid marriage. So the difference between validity and licetiety in that case.
Okay. Well, could you maybe explain the definition of declaration of a nullity, or a nullity as most people sort of use as the common language?
Right.
Yeah.
So we hear a lot the term annulment,
Yeah.
of course, and it's a common language among people from non-Catholics all the way up to bishops and higher.
Some call it a Catholic divorce.
Catholic divorce, I mean, what can I say about Catholic divorce? What we do is not Catholic divorce. The term declaration of nullity is very important. A declaration of nullity means that after we gather all the facts about why the marriage broke down, the church either declares the marriage null or it doesn't. And it can only declare a marriage null if the facts support that. Otherwise, the marriage is presumed valid. I think that's another important point in terms of our law. Marriages are presumed to be valid. So even if the marriage is broken down by divorce, or even if there were very significant issues in the marriage, until the person has come to the tribunal for a declaration of nullity, we still presume the marriage valid, which could be problematic if somebody has entered into a civil union, a second marriage in a sense.
That never happens, though.
But yeah, right.
Happens all the time. Usually by the time they get to us, we're trying to unravel all that. One way I explain it, and let me know if it's a good explanation, is when I was told and taught canon law about marriage, is that consent makes marriage. The consenting not only of the words, but your actions, and that constitutes marriage in the eyes of the church. So if that consent was somehow defective or less than what it should be, then that's what you're looking for. Is there something was missing on either party or both?
That's right. And it's a sort of extended answer to your first question, that consent does make marriage. For the Roman Catholic Church, of course, in the Eastern Catholic churches, it's the blessing of the priest. So in a case where you might have a Roman Catholic marrying a Ukrainian Catholic, a deacon cannot assist at that marriage. It has to be a priest when the Eastern Catholic's present for validity. Okay. The consent piece is important because you're right, a defective consent, somebody coming forward and maybe saying, well, I consent to this marriage and to this person only in as much as they'll remain faithful to me, or only in as much as they'll continue to provide money for me, is a defective consent. So I think that that's a good distinction. And I think, that would be a very simple way to explain what happens in the marriage. Because when people come for a declaration of nullity to the tribunal, most of the focus is on what happened when the marriage broke down. There was an infidelity. We just didn't connect anymore. The children moved out. And for our purposes at the tribunal, we look back to the moment of consent. What kind of family did you come from? Were there any mental health issues? What was your dating history like? Were there any premarital pregnancies that maybe forced you into the marriage? So for our purposes, as a difference to what a civil divorce might look like, our purposes in the tribunal are to look at the time of consent.
You say people coming to the tribunal. Now, is this like Catholic Inquisition dungeon type experience where, we have candles
Explain the
lit?
screaming in the tribunal.
Exactly.
Explain the screaming in the tribunal.
We certainly use court-like terms, judges, depositions.
Do you have the wigs too?
We don't have the wigs.
Oh, gosh.
It's not in the budget this year.
Your Grace,
It's a universal
I don't even
church.
want to go to Canon Law school anymore.
But
No.
so we certainly use those types of terms. But really, there are very few courts in ecclesiastical tribunals, meaning the tribunals in most dioceses are just offices. It sounds like people are coming before a tribunal of judges, and there's going to be a lot of people present.
Yeah, there's
something
no
that you might
Catholic
see in a
jury
judge duty
duty
or something like that. But
So there's no Catholic jury,
they're not in our cases.
There's no canonist duty?
That's right.
And you sold the horse to her for $1,500, which means she owes you $1,400,
Yes.
right?
Yes.
Good. Judgment's on the counterclaim for $1,400. We're done. Thank you.
So no, I mean, most of the time, in most cases, especially in North America, it's one of the parties coming forward with a case instructor to sit down and to have an interview about what went wrong prior to the marriage and following.
Okay.
So it's very low key for the most part.
It is. We try to make it. We try to make it such that it's encouraging for people to come forward and they don't feel like they have to relive what they might have gone through in their civil divorce.
The Catholic Inquisition, now super chill.
Yeah.
But regardless, I do notice with a lot of people that have my 14 years of priesthood that, that's why they don't want to do this kind of stuff, is because they feel like they're going through all this stuff all over again. And for me personally, though, that being said, I get that. But me personally, it sounds like you do need to work on something here if you're still feeling it that badly, that there's pain. But there can be instances of real abuse and things of that nature. People are abusive, people are physically things, and so they're trying to not deal with that. That's their way of dealing with it.
I think you make a good point. It speaks to really another part of what we would say the ministry of the tribunal, which deals with canon law, of course, is that besides being a exercise in trying to find the truth about what happened, that this marriage broke down, we also talk about it as being a healing ministry. Meaning many of the people who come to see us at the tribunal will say that they felt like their side of the story wasn't heard in the civil proceedings. What they're worried about is splitting up the possessions, divvying out the money, seeing where the children are going to go. But for our purposes in the tribunal, it really is an opportunity for them to tell their side of the story. And perhaps even if the divorce was 30 years ago, to have that final period at the end of that chapter. And then if it is declared null, it gives them an opportunity to be free to marry again in the church.
I have to say, a person that I know personally really well, he found when he did the process, what happened to him is he felt at peace. That once he went through it and the people looked at it, he was at peace in his conscience. Because then and he knew that now I can be at peace. Because that's the thing, you were married before. You took this very, very seriously. No matter what you go through with civil divorce and all that, it's you're still married. You did that, and it ended. I know you're going to go marry someone else, and so there's always this unease in your conscience, or should be. It's not something you just kind of easily go to. So feel that you're free to marry. Because that's, I think, the big thing is if you're married before, just because you civilly take care of that, doesn't mean it's been taken care of before God. Right. So that's hard maybe for an atheist, I get that. But for the person you're going to marry, that's very important that you be free to marry. Yeah.
And for somebody, I think, who's Catholic too, who has a real sense of their faith and who thought that they entered into the marriage in good faith, and they did. In fact, in many cases, some of them did enter in good faith, and it was the fault of the other party, perhaps. I think to have that declaration from the church does give them that peace of mind to say, okay, I did try my best here. There was something essential from the beginning of this union that prevented it from being a true marriage as the church understands it. And so to hear that declaration from the church is really helpful for a lot of people.
Okay, see, this is the decree of nullity. So there's a whole process that you do, the normal process. But then there are all, not the exceptions, but the it's like the snakes and ladders. It has all these different things. Like, I call it the stupidity clause. For the Catholics, if you marry outside the church, because explain it. You're required to be married in the church.
This is a very tough one to talk about in a lot of ways, because it doesn't make a lot of sense. So Catholics, of course, are bound by ecclesiastical law, meaning canon law is sort of the broad sense of what we talk about law. Ecclesiastical law binds Catholics. So if you're a Catholic, of course, we know the church says you have to marry before a priest and 2 witnesses. That's how it protects the bond of marriage, before a priest and 2 witnesses. Now, there are other cases where that can change, but now if a Catholic marries, let's say, on the beach in Mexico with a justice of the peace or a minister of another church or something, that marriage is considered invalid because they haven't observed the form. So you're right, Father Mark, for Catholics who've married outside of the church without the proper dispensation, it's what we would call a documentary process. With all the paperwork, it could be done within a week or 2. Whereas you might have the same situation, 2 Anglicans or 2 non-baptized persons marrying on the beach, perhaps the same beach, perhaps by the same minister, and they would have to go through a formal process because they're not bound to get married before a priest and 2 witnesses, as Catholics are.
Why do we have witnesses in the first place?
Well, I guess, that's an old principle of Roman law. In a lot of ways, you needed to have a witness to attest to the fact that something had happened. You remember the woman caught in adultery who was brought to the Lord. In those cases, there was a witness who sort of would have caught them in the act. That's sort of the sense of the gospel, right? That they were almost caught in the very act of adultery. I think those are even the words. The witnesses, in the sense of marriage, are to testify, are to witness to what's going on, that these 2 people are coming together to promise the rest of their life to each other. Which is why I don't like the priest who stands at that marriage as a witness. The priest is not a witness in the marriage. The technical term for the priest is called the assistans, but he has a very active role. As the couple exchange consent with each other, the priest is meant to stand there on behalf of the entire church to receive the consent that the couples give to each other. So in that way, he's not just a witness, a passive sort of bystander watching what's taking place, but he has a very active role in the ceremony itself.
But isn't marriage just a private thing? Isn't just it between the husband and the wife? And, it's up to them. Can't we just have clandestine weddings,
I don't even know if that would fly in the civil forum in terms of 2 people marrying, in their bedroom without the intervention of even a civil.
Who is the state to say, that people can't get married? What's the issue there? What?
But I have a follow-up question for that. Go ahead. Because there is a follow-up question to that.
Will the man just turn around and just, sort of reject her if it's secretly or not secretly, from this marriage? That was my understanding from the reason of why we have witnesses is to bar people from saying, well, there's a legal responsibility that you entered into this relationship.
Well, that's true as well, of course. It's to solidify the consent that's being exchanged, to the couple between themselves. That the witnesses sort of give that extra, it solidifies that consent for sure. That's absolutely correct. But of course, maybe Father Mark's going to get to this in terms of his question.
No, but then there's when that does happen.
Yes.
Because my example would be an old movie, Blue Lagoon. The 2, man and woman, are trapped on an island. They want to give themselves naturally to each other, but say one of them was Catholic.
I'm sorry, Father Mark. I'm a millennial. Blue Lagoon. I have no idea.
Well, it was an interesting movie. Nonetheless, it was like, oh my gosh.
And they are left utterly alone. The years passed, but no ship ever did. Yet the boy and the girl grew strong and tall and beautiful.
So it's one of those films that probably is it R-rated?
I don't know.
It might be R-rated.
I'm with Father Roger. I'm a millennial.
Yeah. It's a millennial.
The Blue Lagoon.
It might be on Netflix. I don't know. I doubt it. It's not some movie. But what happens is they're trapped on this island. Something happens, like Robinson Crusoe, but with 2, and they get trapped on this island, and they love each other. Then can they give consent if one is Catholic because they're supposed to be married before priests and 2 witnesses? But obviously they're unable to do that. So can they give that consent, or would it be valid?
They could certainly give the consent to each other, but it wouldn't be valid.
Oh, interesting.
Well,
My question then is, theologically speaking, then you could condemn these people to be sinners because they wish to give that consent, but you won't give it because the church is mean and nasty.
I condemn no one, Father Mark.
No. Seriously, this is the problem.
Yeah.
You are allowed to be exempt from. You are exempt. You make sure I'm correct in this. You are exempt if you are unable to find a Catholic minister. If you're in a place where you're unable to, in a due kind of way, find a Catholic ministry, you can be married, say, religiously or even civilly, and it would be considered a valid Catholic marriage when there is unable to receive the sacraments from our priest.
There are certain cases which fall into that parameter, certain cases within danger of death, where certain other canons, click into place. If you remember, not too long
Would
ago,
mother-in-law threaten you to marry her son? That would be considered a danger of death.
Yeah, well,
Exempt you. I don't know. I'm a priest.
danger of death for the party, not for the priest.
Well, I don't have to be in danger. Does the priest have to be in danger?
No.
To work? Okay, it's the people. Okay.
Of course, not too long ago, I think it was in the Northwest Territory somewhere, there was a sister who had intervened in a marriage, and she acted on behalf of the church. Of course, even a layperson in certain circumstances could be delegated, that role. So the church does, again, that's where you see a piece of the church trying to provide for the people, trying to protect salvation of souls, and to allow people to still be within the realm of following the laws of the church, but maybe not in such a strict way. So there are provisions. We call them dispensations.
Cool. So there's a couple other ones that are cool ones that are the exceptions. It's the get out of jail free cards. It's the Pauline privilege and the Petrine privilege.
Wait. There's a Catholic prison now? I mean, there's Catholic courts.
Well, there's Roman Rota.
There's the Apostolic Penitentiary as well.
Down before, and if they're screaming there, that might be what it is.
That's right.
Who's funding that, though, then?
The bank.
The Vatican Bank.
That's why.
That's a conversation for another time.
That's a letter to Pope Francis. He's got to take care of that.
You mentioned the Pauline privilege and the Petrine privilege. Both very interesting. The Pauline privilege basically sees a situation where you might have two unbaptized people who enter into marriage, and one subsequently comes to faith in the marriage, and they wake up and they say, wow, the beauty of the Catholic faith. I want to be baptized Catholic. And so the person becomes baptized, and the non-baptized party makes it very difficult for them to live out their Catholic faith. In that case, when the person has become baptized and when the marriage has fallen apart because of that baptism and because of the person coming to faith, there is a provision, the Pauline privilege, which allows us to dissolve the marriage and allows the Catholic party to be free to marry. In the case of a Petrine privilege, or what we call a favor of the faith, those are situations where you might have two unbaptized persons, and the case itself goes to Rome, and the Holy Father grants basically nullifies the marriage or grants the favor of the faith, allowing the non-baptized party to go and marry a Catholic party.
So this is the question every single one of us want to know. Can the Pope be impeached? Can the Pope be impeded? And you probably need to explain what either one of those means. So.
Okay, can the Pope be impeached or kicked out of office or fired? No, is the strict answer. Of course he cannot be. I think it's Canon 1404 that says the first see is judged by no one, meaning there's the College of Bishops, an ecumenical council, College of Cardinals, they can't impeach the Pope. Now, there are provisions in canon law which speak about a vacant see, so that would be when the Pope dies, the see is considered vacant, or the see is impeded, meaning the Holy Father perhaps is in a coma, or...
Can the see be impeded then? What do you do when the Holy See is impeded?
The see could for sure be impeded, but nothing can happen in terms of the role of the Holy Father. What we would say is that the day-to-day sort of thing would carry on with the various officials, but the Holy Father is still the Holy Father. And so there can't be any real innovations. You can't call an ecumenical council. You can't put out a papal encyclical because the Pope is impeded from acting. So, in a worst case scenario, you could see a Pope maybe who is in a coma, let's say, for maybe 5 years or 10 years, or that would be a huge problem.
So there's
for
no
us.
provisions in law that allow bishops to be appointed at all or anything like that?
There would be nothing in law which would allow the Pope to be removed from office.
What if the Pope resigns? I mean, the most
Like that
unlikely.
never happens. but
Never happens.
What if it happens? What if he's still living and the other Pope dies? This is going to be fascinating because Pope Francis could just die before Pope Benedict does.
Do canonists just flip their desks and, That's not just going to the bar.
I wonder if you have that. You can order it online where you have this desk that you can flip over and it just changes color and you just flip it over again.
You notice the precision with which Pope Benedict resigned. On this day, at this time, I will no longer be, the Pope, right? So he did that in his right mind, and he did it at a specific time and a specific day, because it's important to have that. When is the see impeded?
No, it would be vacated at that moment.
That's right. In that case, it would be vacant for sure. But because he resigned of his own free will for sure. But the questions on the popes are interesting, and both John Paul II and Pope Benedict reformed the process of the conclave, of course, and so now it was.
I have to say, in the season of the primaries, it is amazing how quickly we can elect a pope. Like really, when you think about it, as complicated as we can, how quickly we can have a pope and come to consensus.
During the conclave, every day is Super Tuesday or Super Wednesday.
Of course, there's not supposed to be any of that type of stuff going on in the conclave.
Of course, it never happens.
The Holy Spirit, of course, chooses the Holy Father.
That in order to elect a pope, you need a 2/3.
Oh, wait. It is the Holy Spirit. It is super above Tuesday, which is coming from the supernatural reality
Even if it happens
of
on
God
Wednesday or
himself.
Thursday or Friday or Saturday or Sunday.
But it is still super, in that way. So yeah, it's the Holy Spirit. There we go.
There we go. We just had to throw that in.
Yeah.
That's fair.
American in you. Yeah.
John, thank you for joining us at this episode of Left Footers. I feel like we want you back to answer more questions and have more of this kind of discussion, because it is really fascinating once you sort of take the first layer off of the word law, because law seems to a lot of people something that's dry, something that's obscure. But once we start talking about it, my gosh, it's super relevant.
Thanks for having me. It's good to be here.
Awesome. Good to have you.
Please join us next time at Left Footers. Please like us and subscribe to us and do all the other little buttons. And I don't know, you can probably edit that out.
Please, I don't know how to say this electronic stuff.
Pretty much. Thanks for joining us.